On this episode of the S.B.R podcast, we'll be joined by Todd Stofka, a prominent Philadelphia-based hypnotherapist and practitioner of Neuro-Linguistic Psychology. Todd is an entrepreneur and founder of Philly Hypnosis. Todd and I will discuss the world of hypnosis in sports, Neuro-Linguistic Psychology. We will even simulate a real-life client situation and proceed to talk through the hypnosis process. Joining me today on the S.B.R podcast is Todd Stafka. Todd is a certified hypnotherapist and a master practitioner of Neuro-Linguistic Psychology. He developed the Stofka method by integrating neuro-linguistic programming and hypnotherapy with his background in Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, and a variety of competitive sports. Todd is the founder of Philly Hypnosis Centers, and since 2001, Todd has been spending his days rewiring negative thoughts or behaviors and assisting his clients in overcoming a wide variety of obstacles. In addition to his appearance today on the S.B.R podcast, Todd has been published and has been a contributor on ESPN, BBC, Fox News, CBS, and multiple local Philadelphia affiliates. Without further ado, Todd, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, Todd, it's my pleasure. And, our first question, I just have to ask, and I think my listeners are curious, how did you first hear about hypnotherapy?
That's a great question. I think back in my earlier career in being a sales manager, I was exposed to kind of as a sales manager, sort of the mental game. How can you have a rapport and relationship with somebody very quickly, and yet it's almost as if you're Chinese and the other person speaking French, right? You're sitting at a table, you're sitting across the desk, and you just can't communicate. So I happened to run across Neuro-Linguistic Psychology. And what it began to do is unpack the way, God has us thinking. We kind of fire and wire our brain, or wire and fire it in different ways. And we have different ways we see things, hear things, feel things, and it becomes our belief system, and that belief system runs into our, the patterns that we live. So when you begin to understand how people process certain things, there becomes a very repeatable actions that they have. And with that, then you can take that information and use it to develop better rapport, or you can break rapport, with that. So as you looked at how, neuro-linguistic psychology got started, one of the founders, or the people they studied, and this is where modeling came from, the two founders, Bandler and Grinder, modeled a guy named Milton Erickson, who was the grandfather or father of U.S. and British hypnosis. And Milton Erickson had this ability, even though he was disabled, to develop a great rapport and help people make a lot of breakthroughs and a lot of changes. And so what they saw, they developed for NLP called modeling, and they would just basically take the techniques that Milton has used without necessarily knowing exactly all the background behind it, and were able to repeat the performance. And so when you began to look at, people, let's say one of the things they studied was marksmen in the military, and how can someone be such a great marksman? You could take somebody like Tiger Woods, when in his peak of his golf, we could bring him in for a seminar, and he might not be the best teacher. However, he, during his day was the best golfer, on the PGA. So the ability to play and the ability to communicate are really two different things. However, if we can understand enough of, Tiger's brain, what he thinks about, that controls the micro movements in his body, because any golf swing, like a baseball swing or rolling a, bowling ball, probably has over 100 little micro movements. And your brain cannot possibly do, 100 things, because your conscious mind can do plus 7 plus or minus 2 thoughts at one time. Your unconscious mind handles, some people will say, 2.3 million things per second. So the idea of, if you with a golf club or a baseball bat, the idea of holding it back, elbow adjustment, hips, wrist, movement through, snap, you can't think that and talk your way through it, especially, in an elite level, because the ball, as we were talking about earlier, takes about 1/10 of a second or less to move from the, fingertips of that pitcher into the mid of the catcher, right? So there's got to be a way in your brain to set those things up on more of an automated process. And when you're in the zone and doing it well, batters get hits, golfers make great shots. And when it's off, guess what? You're striking out, you're missing shots, towing it, heeling it, topping it, and not having a great day. And then the question is what do you do the next time you're up to bat, or the next time you're ready to, hit the golf ball? Are you repeating the past failures, or is your mind in the zone clear enough to do what you want it to do, right? So when you begin to model, they looked at marksmen, and some of these people that at great distance with a sight on a rifle were able to hit bullseye after bullseye after bullseye. And, the confidence to, on the trigger, a very sensitive trigger, be able to hold it and adjust it in all kinds of weather conditions and still hit the mark. They could take that, and then they built a way to train other people to become close to their results. They might not be the absolute best, but where they were, at such a low level in performance, they were able to get repeatable performance out of people by taking the internal wiring, thought process, dialogue that was in that top performer and putting it in other people. So that modeling part came out. And so when you look at this, you begin to model experts, and you begin to basically download, if you think about it in a computer term, that their mental technology into yours so that you can begin to duplicate it. And then obviously get it to work in your personality in such a way that it becomes a favorable trait performance-wise to you in getting results.
Now, Todd, let me ask you something. There's the physical component, just say for better sake, shooting a foul shot. Then there's also the component where, the visual component. We talked a little bit previously about the physical component and practicing. Say you're a 70% foul shooter, you continue to practice, you might up your foul shot percentage to maybe 80% after a couple weeks or a couple months, depending how diligent you are of practice. That being said, for those who are more maybe a visual learner, or for better lack of a word, do just visualize it, are you saying they'll have some sort of success too? Is that something? Is that a component?
So what you're referring to, let's kind of for your listeners, let's kind of build a baseline of what we're talking about. So we take basketball players or people that just throw the basketball, and we baseline them with, let's say, a free throw shot, right? Have them throw 100 of them, kind of get a number of where they're at. So the question is that you're going to have people physically practice this and then just mentally practice this. So I think it was either the University of Arizona or Indiana that did this test, where they would take people and set them in a room and teach them to mentally rehearse making the free throws. So all they did was sit there. They didn't touch a ball for a week, and then they just mentally rehearsed it in a certain way, and then they went out and retested it. So the people that were physically throwing it came in roughly about the same, and the people throwing, who throwing for the first time and after a week were just mentally, threw at 8 to maybe 15% better than the people that physically practiced. And the reason that comes with that is that when you learn to do this mentally, you still get all 5 senses, the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic, the touch, sometimes smell and taste in there, and you can do it perfectly. So you and I go head to head and shooting free throws. however good we are, we're going to miss. Like you said, somebody shooting 70% means they made 7, they missed 3. So if you think about when you were going to school and you came home and you got a 7 out of 10, so 7 out of 10 on the basketball court gets you millions of dollars. 7 out of 10 coming home to your parents on a quiz probably gets you sent to your room, right? Right? I mean, it's not acceptable, right? So when you bring that in there, what are you focusing on? Are you focused on the ability to make 70% or the 30% that you miss?
You're focusing on positives, I'd imagine. Am I wrong?
Well, you would think, but how often, when the sports as a baseball player, think this is a worse percentage. We hire Bruce Harper, on the Bryce Harper, excuse me, and he was batting with the Washington Nationals, 350, 4.
Yeah, he had a couple of good years where he was over 300.
That means 7 out of 10, though, he messed up. The pitcher's got the best of him, right?
In baseball, if you get hit 3 out of 10 times, you're a Hall of Famer, right? 7 out of 10 times you're failing.
That's right. So you've got to balance that out because 7 times you failed, 3 times you've done well.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So it's a failure game. Even with the best PGA golfers, they probably will tell you that out of a round of 72, maybe 5 to 8 shots were really what they think were outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's those days when you mentally in there that you're playing ugly, right? You're not hitting the fairways, but you're still scoring okay, right? Or you're hitting your fairways and you're still 4-putting it. Your game falls apart. It's being able to understand the mental process that controls your body when you're in the moment to do whatever that action is. Whether it's, your drive, your fairway shot, your approach shot, your putt, get up, in the baseball, you're going to get at least 3 swings at a ball.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts? Your thought about all the times you struck out before? Is it your girlfriend? Your coach yelled at you, something came on. Get up there and you got competing thoughts versus one thing, see the ball hit the ball.
At Philly Hypnosis, to kind of give our listeners an idea of what you do, going off of that, let's just say, kind of role playing here, I'm a golfer. My game is pretty solid, right? Essentially, maybe the last couple of rounds, I have shot a 72, 71, plus or minus, 1 or 2 here or there. However, I've lost a lot of strokes on the green. My putting game is not good right now. And I have a lot of big tournaments coming up. I'm focused on those. I'm kind of reflecting on my past performances. I come to you as a client. What's the first thing you're going to do with me? How are you going to better my game or my thought process?
So one of the things I do is I have an intake and assessment form.
Okay.
And what this does is it kind of puts in the framework of the sport of golf, where some of the things that people identify issues. So, here's one common that comes up. You suffer from anxiety, worry, or excess tension when in competition.
Sure.
So, the visual thing that happens if you played golf and you're putting is that you're standing over the ball, whether it's a 20-footer or a 2-footer. What do you do with the hole? I'm not sure what the actual measurements of a hole are. Let's say they're 5 inches, 6 inches or something. So what happens to most people is they make that hole so small that the ball can never go in their mind, right? So it doesn't matter if they hit it in the center, it wasn't going to go in. But what would happen if we made the hole 3 feet wide, in their mind?
Probably have a lot more success.
Yeah, you'd have a lot more success, right?
Yeah.
What if you could take that and look at it as you're reading the green and almost kind of, it's almost like you could drag your putter and cut a groove, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once you kind of got in your idea of, the direction, what if you could cut a groove or imagine putting it along a line?
Yeah.
So it goes in. So, with the free throw shot we were talking about before, one of my female clients gave me this visual. They look at it as a rainbow. A rainbow has a nice arc. So if you thought about a nice metal arc, that all you did was push the ball up and it rolled over and then it dropped, swish, same idea. You rolled it on the green here, and it rolls right in, right? You've got a visual part of it. And then when you think about when I've had my best rounds of golf or any sport, last night I was playing cornhole against my neighbor, and we're pretty competitive. When I'm relaxed and almost having, you could say, an out-of-body experience,
Okay.
my body's just doing it naturally, right?
Yeah.
But when I start breaking down, like, my swing, like, am I taking my back swing too far back? Am I breaking my wrist too soon? I start to try and change things versus just let it go smooth, and like not a care in the world. My best rounds, in golf or anything have been like when I'm totally out of my head. There's no conscious noise.
Yeah.
I'm just letting it flow. Right. So that's me. Now that may be a little different than you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, but in looking at that, how do we get you back into that state where you have your peak performance? And so when we know what that peak performance is, we can repeat it. It may seem like it's as magical as in Harry Potter, that little Quidditch that, they chased around. However, you can begin to repeat that. So whether it's a visual trigger, an auditory trigger, a kinesthetic trigger, you can get that back right there so you can repeat it. And repeat it, and be in the zone.
Sure.
And if you watched, I had a chance a couple of times to be in, PGA tournaments, and Tiger was really one of the best at this. Probably still is. I haven't watched him, or seen him in person, but you can see, and I think Adam Scott talked about it last year. I was looking at some interviews. Is that when they're inside the ropes?
Mm-hmm.
Like everything disappears. Well, now with this pandemic, there's no gallery to watch. Anyways, but when they're inside, everything else disappears. So when you think about if you've played golf and you're standing on the tee and there's hazards out there, water or out of bounds or something, how big do you make the water?
It's my focus. It shouldn't be, but it is when I tee off. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So, it's like, if it's Bagger Vance, the greatest game ever played, they actually show this because, in a golf thing, an amateur, what they're going to do is they're going to make the faro narrower and longer,
mm-hmm.
right? So making it much more difficult to go in there versus somebody that you think about making it wider and shorter.
Okay.
I have gymnasts on the balance beam. It's 4 inches wide and it's, I think, 4 feet off the ground. So, when you think about that, when their brain gets overwhelmed, all of a sudden that, beam gets to be like a rope that Walendas walk on, right? Or a wire.
Sure.
As opposed to what if we made it 3 feet wide? And your feet just naturally, stick and bounce off the beam, where you want. It's becoming, coming back to your original question here, is defining, what you want, and then what's the mental zone or framework that allows you to repeat that performance as easy as possible.
So let me ask you, you said you are a competitive cornhole player and you play against your neighbor. Cornhole is a very repetitive sport, as you know.
It is.
And right, the objective is to get the bag into the hole.
Right.
It's a non-moving target. Do you specifically have any advice for cornhole players out there? Or is there some sort of tactic that you use personally? I'm just curious.
Well, there's really two tactics. One, when you're playing, heads up or team, you're actually playing against one person.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like playing, match play in golf.
Okay.
I don't necessarily have to be better than you. I just have to have you so they could easily frustrate their opponents. So that's always something in my tool bag. The second part is dialing what I want. So, when you come in my office, I have there. So once I practice on a board, if it's in the backyard versus, inside where it's super flat and they can be set up well, you kind of get a general flow of how the bags slide on it. So I just kind of, once I know that and I can see how my bags are sliding, I just kind of pick where I want it to land.
Okay.
And I can get it to move.
Sure.
And then, there's other parts of it if you're blocking and, setting up a little bit of defense or, really, when you airmail something and you just drop it in on your opponents and, it just kind of frustrates them because they're doing well. And then you put something in that's a low percentage shot, but you nail it. And, then you just kind of, put some more fuel on the fire to get them annoyed. And then they typically derail.
Yeah.
Because, it was something like last night. I mean, I think I had, in a bunch of games, I had 2 4-baggers in one game, where you put all four of them in there. And then I still watched my opponent. And, in that game, like all of a sudden he was missing the board, and he's kind of going like, what's going on? Like, it's like carnage off the book because all your bags are in the grass, type of thing. But it becomes that internal frustration. And the question is, this is an area that I have on my assessment, is learning to manage mistakes.
Okay.
Because mistakes are going to happen. The question is how do you manage them? Sure. And being able to, especially, whether it's a business situation or, in sports, is that can you come up to the next, shot, action that you have to take and come up clean, and or use what you would call a negative situation to help you perform at a peak level. Okay. And let me give you an example of this. So back for the London Olympic Games, I worked with a gentleman named Kadivus Robinson, and he was in his early 30s. I think he was 34. He happened to be the women's track coach at UNLV at the time. Okay. And I began to work with him with the mental game of running. He ran the 800 meters. And at 34, most of the Olympians running are pretty much coming out of college. So he was still training. And one of the things is Kadivus was still quick. He still was, he was in contention. However, he had a thing that he developed when he would come to a race. And when he would come to a race, I think an hour before, he would get a little anxious. He could, vomit. He could get tight. It's that the pre-race jitters or pre-game jitters that people have. Sure. And it never really kept him out of the blocks for running. However, there was a lot of inconsistencies. So when you think about this pre-race jitters effect, now you could think on one hand, if we could reach in and find it's usually in your gut or in your head or in your throat or something, depending on how you do this, because it's something they do to themselves. If I could think about if I could reach in and grab it and throw it away, right? Which is, one way to look at this. And we put in calmness, or we put in focus, or we put in confidence, or whatever, is one end of the spectrum, right? Sure. And when I worked with him on this, I said, hey, if we could cut this off, what would it be like? And he was going, you can't do that. I've been doing this since I, was a young athlete. So it's a learned skill. So I imagine, I didn't really press him for it, but when I work with other people, I usually, if the parents are in there, I was going to say, which one of you taught him this? Because it's an unconscious behavior. It's a learned behavior that way. So the other thing is that one of the ways I like to use is called utilization. And so here, where you wouldn't think of taking something of an anxiety pre-race jitters, how could we use it? Well, the pre-race jitters mean only one thing, and that's that he's at a race. Yeah. Okay. And I asked him, why are you at a race? And he looks at me kind of like, I'm there to run. Okay. And I said, how do you want to run? And he goes, I want to run fast. I said, and when you run fast, what happens? He goes, I win. All right. So here's a new neural connection that we built, on a very simple 4-step thing was pre-race jitters means I'm at a race. I'm here to run. And when I run fast equals I win. Yeah. Okay. And so I built that whole process. So what you would call is a negative situation that he wasn't going to give up, right? I mean, I asked him, can we get rid of this? And he said, no. I said, all right, well, let's use it. I mean, it's going to happen, right? So as long as you recognize that, your brain then doesn't go into cramps and, throwing up and, anything else that would limit you, but just means, hey, I'm at a race. Okay. I'm here to run. I'm going to run fast. We call them, flash. And, he started getting really consistent in his races. Pre-qualified, he was a number 2 man for the, U.S. team, at the London Games, and he's in his 30s. Wow. So it was that, type of way that you can look at things at whatever level. I don't really care if you're 8 years old or, you're 50 years old. It doesn't really matter. You're still going through something in your brain. Your brain thoughts always lead to behaviors and actions that lead to, feelings and emotions.
Sure.
This is the fire and wire that they think. So are you remembering your past? Is it your past mistakes, or you remember in your successes, right? And this is where, you've got your past part of you, and part of it can act like a boat anchor because you're sorting back there. Then you flip it over into your imagination, which is your short-term future, and it becomes worry, anxiety, and fear.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then, if you get into worrying, now you're worrying about making a mistake.
Yeah.
And so you're putting your energy into the mistake versus putting your energy into, draining the pot.
Yeah, and let's take a step back here, because I know this is a sports business podcast. However, everyday life, people have anxieties going into a big meeting, running a meeting, maybe that large interview that you landed, no matter what it is, right? Do you also deal with just everyday individuals in the world of business, or those who maybe even just want to lose weight and have anxiety over losing weight?
Absolutely. I mean, so weight loss, stopping smoking. I think I've worked with over 800 smokers, and clients are running better than 85% success rate.
Wow.
So, making, that addiction, breaking that addiction, getting back to enjoying fresh air, because they believe the lie. Mm-hmm. Weight loss is, the enjoyment of more food, not enough, physical activity, and the belief system that coordinates between there. Mm-hmm. Whether the belief was learned or, observed because your family just is that way, a habit of overeating, large individuals. And, what's your belief on being thin?
Sure.
So let's come back to your business meetings, because this is kind of where, one of the areas at first that I kind of used it for myself, in that thinking about what you're going to have a meeting. And if it's a first time meeting versus you're running, an agile or scrum, stand up meeting or something a little bit different, because everybody knows each other, voice of the customer, voice of the process, you can begin to think about, what do you want to have happen? Where do I need to move this herd, from, in this next 30 minutes, and where do I need to move this herd over the next 6 months? Mm-hmm. Right. And looking at, when you look at from the back part and design it from the rear, from the finish line back, you're saying like, hey, I need to get the change management of this group, design it in such that they're firing and wiring and doing this, and we've accomplished, X, Y, and Z, and we're on A, B, and C, right? Sure. So you begin to kind of work it back and say like, okay, what kind of steps do I need to take them through, as a group and as individuals, and begin to explain it to them, begin to make it, function. And, the simplest way in doing this is, it's called the format system. One of the things I learned back, but people in their brain want to know 4 things. They want to know why they're there, which I think it's around 40% of the people want to know why. Why am I in this room? Why am I in this meeting, right? Mm-hmm. And you answer the why question, then they're ready to hear the what. So some people will know why they're there. They want to know what we're going to do, what's involved, where are we, what are we going to end up, as the end result or something. So now you've got maybe 30%. So now 70% of your audience is on board, because they understand why they're there, what's going to be involved. The next group wants to know, they already know why they're there, what's going on, but they want to know, how are we going to do it? So you're kind of chunking down, getting a little bit more in the weeds and a little more specificity, in doing this, right? And now that's going to take us to about between 85 and 90% of the audience that's on board. And you've got the last ones, which are your what if people. And they're sitting there going like, well, what if we do this and it fails, or what if it doesn't work, or what if, so they've taken your idea, they basically tried it on, taken it into the future, and it doesn't work in their mind.
Sure.
However, it looks, it sounds, it feels, it smells, it tastes, it doesn't really matter. They've just kind of, gone out and used it, and they can't believe it at this point, right? So your job is you have to inoculate against what they could potentially do in that situation.
Okay.
Right. And so now all of a sudden you've got a cohesive group, and you can have it, as voice of the customer, voice of the process. You can have your devil's advocate. You can put these different roles in there and begin to manage, because we've got this vision has all these components in it. They may not all like it, but they've agreed to it. And you begin to do that. So now that's a framework of, working with the people. Now you standing up in front of it, right? How are you? Do you have the confidence? Do you have the curiosity? Do you have the fun, the playfulness, the steel toe shoes to kick people, through the hoop, that, and beginning to play that role, and becomes kind of interesting because you can change your demeanor. And how's your demeanor need to be to become more effective, more charismatic, and in doing things? Is that giving you a little bit of insight?
It makes complete sense, because I'll say, as a sales manager in my full-time role, we have a meeting once a week, and we don't necessarily run off an agenda. And I can feel kind of some apprehension in the room, individuals who aren't really tuned in, people who are half listening, the doubters, those who are on board, they're very few at the start of the meeting. As some of those answers start rolling in and questions are asked, it seems like engagement levels pick up. But it sounds like almost how you command the room through maybe an agenda or your attitude can set the tone for the meeting.
Sure. I mean, you want to, it's like herding cats.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's, kind of looking at some of the projects and people you come in and you're working with, is like, how am I going to get these cats from, point A to point B, when they're acting like this? So when you're working with salespeople, they tend to be more options-oriented people, where they like a lot of variety and don't really like to be procedural.
Sure.
And so when you find salespeople don't like they're getting everything done, they're very good. They're very people-oriented. They tend to, make relationships and open doors pretty easily. But sometimes doing the mundane, repeatable things doesn't necessarily work. So if you look at a lot of, selling manuals and selling books that are out there, they tend to want to put, different boxes around the way people think. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. There's other people, where they're accountants or financial specialists, they enjoy a tight, box environment around them, because those walls help them feel secure. I don't really want my accountant doing my taxes to be really option oriented. I want him to know where the IRS guidelines are and how you can work, right off the line without giving it all away.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't need him to be, putting me into some Ponzi scheme where we lose it all.
Exactly.
The same idea when you're looking at looking at people and how God's wired them. What are their traits that make them good, and how do we make them better?
Okay.
Make them, increase the performance. And so, you have that on an individual basis, and then you begin to take that into, into a group, a team.
Sure.
A team into, a bigger, unit, or, part of a company or division, depending on the size of your organization.
For a team or a large organization, obviously you have a very robust background yourself. Are there any individuals who may be in the media, or let's just say high-profile individuals who have followed these teachings? Any coaches, any business personnel that you can think of offhand?
I mean, you think of any, Belichick as a football. I mean, he's gotten a group of people and he's put a team together where he's made a repeatable process, right?
Sure.
And the repeatable process is to move the ball 100 yards down the field. And the other one is to stop you from doing that. I mean, that's, all the little elements of that is how he does it, whether it's a low scoring game, a high scoring game, he just has more points on his side and less on yours.
Yeah.
When you kind of look at great people being able to take others and make them perform better and repeatable. Really, that's what you're looking at with, your management skills.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's great people running, think of Bezos, how he's taken Amazon, versus Sears. If you've been around a little bit longer, you remember Sears had, the beginning of what Amazon had, and they decided not to go with it and have now gone out of business practically. And Amazon now has, what came out, I remember growing up with the Wish book, right? There was a catalog. You got this catalog and you kind of marked what you wanted for Christmas or things you're looking for. Now we just do it on a browser and we go to, somebody's website, right? Same idea.
Yeah.
But it was out 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and they didn't, progress with it. And you've got things, you've got the automotive industry changing, with e-vehicles and electric vehicles now versus ICE internal combustion. And, and Tesla all of a sudden is more valuable than, the classic GM, Ford, and Chrysler. So, there's change and those disruptors that as you're beginning to move and look at how do we take advantage of it. There's plenty of failures along the way. Those are two of the big successes, but I imagine, they've put a lot of businesses out of business who haven't been flexible enough to, make that change.
Sure. And whether it's your client who ran in the Olympics, I forget his name, I apologize.
Cadivas Robinson,
whether it's Cadivas Robinson or maybe just another client who's a golfer or a client who's looking to lose weight. Is there a difference between the mindset that they have when they first meet you and the mindset they have when they work with you?
Okay. So you think about anybody is they have a desire to be better, best, right? However, there's something holding them back. They're in some type of failure mode, slump mode, right? So they realize that my trainer is as good as your trainer, so it's got to be something else in the software that's causing the hardware not to function right. So it's really the mental game. That's really the next frontier. In this, without going into performance enhancing drugs and other things like that, but it's your brain, because it's your brain that allows you to have this peak performance. So, the typical person is looking at, I want to get better. However, I'm something mentally is holding me back. Mm-hmm. Whether it's emotions that are causing them to eat, cigarettes sticking them in your mouth. I've helped people off of opioids, or it's just hitting bad golf balls, right?
Yeah.
So I've taken, golfers that have come to me that, we're good, but have, lost it to come back to, club champions. And seeing their performance change so quickly when they begin to focus more on what they want, is I think the two things I've talked about: focus on what they want, and then, managing mistakes.
Sure.
Because you're not gonna do it perfect, and you're gonna have to keep yourself engaged and performing well enough so that you're still pressing forward. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it, you'll see this. I'm trying to remember how many years ago, but if you watch the Ryder Cup a lot of times, I think the U.S. was way up. And if you've played competitive golf, it's hard to play conservative. Good golfers play sort of on that edge where they're pushing it a little bit, and then as they push it and, try and, a little slice or a little hook, bend the ball or something, and it goes in, it just, again, it boosts their confidence, which means they press a little further, but it also steals it from your competitors, right? Because they go to try it and they can't do it, or they, dump it in the water, or they don't get there. And then they're frustrated because they see someone else doing it. Right. And
sure.
As opposed to if you had a different mindset going like, hey, if Brian can do it, I can do it. Mm-hmm. Right. If he did it, I can do it. I swing it's golf club and a golf ball. Who cares? It's a baseball and it's a fence. If he can hit it over, I can hit it over. Right. And have some fun at it. If he can do a 4-bagger, I can do a 4-bagger, or if he can lead this group, I can lead this group. We got to just make the adjustment. So, once you have those influences that come in, how do you begin to play with that? So, the typical part, as I said, they're going to have a desire to move forward. They're going to be in some failure and slump. So to keep that is to then look at the framework of what they need, how they need to look, hear, and feel in the moment, right, when they're performing it.
Sure.
What does it need to do so that you can be in the zone or as close to the zone to be neutral to good? That's that way. And then you need to learn how to play ugly. You're not hitting the fairways, but you're still par in the hole. You're playing that way. You've got some anger and some frustration, but you're still, moving the ball down the court, down the fairway. If you're bowling, down the alley. So whatever that is, there's going to be days where it's magical, and then there's days when it's ugly. And you can't buy a basket. I mean, you watch Steph Curry, this guy can drain threes like it's magic. This hoop's like 10 feet wide. But there's days like, you watch him score 30 points, or, and then all of a sudden, he has a day where he scores only 4 points. Like you're kind of going like, what? It's just, what's happening with him that there's a change. But as a team, as we were talking in sales, when you get into a team sport now, you have to be a good enough leader to get the other 4 people to carry it. And you'll see that, in LeBron James and, in his transition, right? There's days where, he's the king and you just get out of his way because he's a freight train coming through. But there's other days he's smart enough to know that, hey, for whatever reason, I'm not hot. I don't have the touch. He still score a few points here and there, but he's feeding his team, and they typically play well.
Sure. Great. And those are kind of transcending players, right? Like you said, Steph Curry might only score 10 points, but that game he might have 15 assists. Or the game before he had 35 points, but only 6 assists. And so ultimately you're saying knowing you're having a bad day doesn't mean that it should translate to a completely bad performance or your teammates suffering.
Right.
So, those who are true leaders psychologically can identify the fact that, yeah, I'm not shooting well today. Maybe I can't visualize that arc or that rainbow, but at the same time, my teammate's hot. And, we had that conversation about the rainbow before the game, and look at him. He's 6 for 6 from the field.
Right. So, and so this is how you see team play and that cohesiveness when you begin to put everyone together. So when I did some of the things with basketball, we were talking about the shooting. I followed a couple of the college teams that had me come in, and what I saw was the shooting from the field for the next couple games when I knew the players were listening to the audio that I created from that session with them. They were shooting in the 30s up into the 40s, like almost a 10-point jump.
Wow. Because
they were playing together. And I wasn't really working on teamwork so much, but everybody's excited, everyone's doing better, it becomes contagious.
I was going to ask you that. Do you believe in kind of a contagious energy?
All the time. I mean, look at baseball, right?
Yeah.
If you have a game and it's a low scoring game, the pitchers are winning it, right? All of a sudden, and there's a big inning. Did Jesus come down and bless all the bats and, magically they get hits? No, the first guy got up and for whatever reason he got a hit. And if he can do it, I can do it, and then it becomes a big, huge inning.
Sure.
And so, that mental, change between the pitcher, basically shutting down the batters mentally. Now the pitcher gets into trouble because he's no longer hitting the marks that he needs to hit to keep the ball away from the batters, or at least keep him away from getting a hit. But he's got to also remember that he's got 8 other players that are there to work with him. And it's really a 9-on-1 game when you play baseball or softball. That's really the design of it. So when you're really on, defense, with the pitcher and everybody in the field, it's a huge advantage. And so you got to mentally look at and structure things differently. But if you start getting, when you watch a pitcher start to get hit, have big innings, and he can't pull himself out, they pull him out of the game and they put someone in because it just gets contagious on the other team from getting hits. So coming back to your three questions, so I want to make sure. So we talked about the typical. We've got this area of now of being able to help players, or business people get into the zone, keep the zone, expand the zone. And there's a lot of other components that we haven't gotten to, and this allows you to let them grow into the change. All right. So that everybody has to own it. So anything that I work with, when we're working, part of my sessions, we're talking, we're building, we're testing, and then there's the eyes closed process where I'm really helping get the conscious mind out of the way, the critic out of the way, so that we can get this information into the subconscious, because this is where it runs automatically. And part of, the homework that I have with people is that they need to listen to the recording, because number one, it's relaxing, right? It's the opposite of stress. Number two, it causes you to focus. And you're focusing on what you want. So as you begin to do that, I can take somebody in their mind, throw 100 pitches that are perfect, throw 100 free throws that are perfect, and you can't get that same simulation in real life because there's mistakes.
So that's more of the hypnosis component.
Correct.
Okay. Makes complete sense.
And so now this becomes part of the change, which means you can take what we did in our sessions, you have an audio. So my clients have audio files that I've made it for them that they can go back and re-listen to. And they can begin to figure out, like, okay, when we did this gave me this component, then we build on it. Everything we do still counts. We build on it going forward. And they begin to own it and really tailor things to them. I mean, they'll come in and I'll ask them a question, what's going well, right? And then I'm looking for them to focus on the things that they've been doing well, not the things that have gone wrong. I know the things that have gone wrong, right? Nobody's perfect. So, but the question is are you building on your successes? And then that success begins to grow, which pushes out your failures.
Let me ask you something. So for me personally, right, I get so much enjoyment out of going to the gym, working out, just some free advice here, free guidance here, right? I get so much enjoyment out of working out. I feel great every time I do it. In fact, when I was younger, I was extremely active. I feel like over the years, now that my job has got more intense, I have more burdens, responsibilities, financial pressures, I still go to the gym. However, I don't find myself working out as hard. I feel myself kind of getting a little bit lazy, lackadaisical. Then there's times I do go, I break a sweat, I feel great again. Oh, I'll do this tomorrow. And I just have that issue. It's a push and pull of recent struggles where I just can't get any consistency, right? How would you help me go to the gym, come to the realization that it's what I need, it's what makes me feel good and empowers me and honestly probably benefits me elsewhere in my life?
So Brian, I'll give you an example, then we'll pull this in the story. So I've taken, people in my office, and I've had them, depending on whether it's a weight loss or some other athlete, and I have them imagine that we're going on a run.
Okay.
And I talk about them, it's going on a 3-mile, 5-mile run, and I get into this and feel yourself going up the hill, feel your heart beginning to beat, really begin to get into the moment right now. Just feel yourself going, feel yourself pushing me, I'm pushing you, and you look at it, you've just made 5 seconds, ahead of your thing. And I've had people break out into a sweat, sitting in a chair, because they made it so real in their mind. Their muscles are firing. So this is some of the other tests that you can look up. But they've had people imagine that they've worked out, whether it's a bicep curl, bench press, and so forth. And when they tested them a month later, they saw, I think, I don't know, it was 11 or 13% the group. So they had a placebo group that did nothing. They had one that went to the gym. They had one that mentally did the exercises but did not lift a weight. They saw gains, almost the same gains from the people that lifted to the people that mentally imagined they've lifted.
Wow.
Okay. So because what ends up happening is in your mind, you fire and wire, you fire this off through there. You're engaging the muscles, the ligaments, the joints that are there, right? So this is how powerful your brain is. And it could get us into a whole other topic, but it's not appropriate for today.
A different episode, possibly.
Different episode, yeah. It's going to be more of an R-rated episode for that one. It's another performance anxiety that people have. But it's a perfect example of hypnosis. But so the key thing for someone like yourself would be is that you pull up to the gym, all right? And before you jump out of the car, I want you to, I don't know, do you have a workout sheet if you're doing chest, back, buys, tries? Do you have a?
I do, yes. I just usually I try to write up a plan before I go and then follow it.
So whether, however you got your plan, I want you to sit there and I want you to very quickly go through that. So as you're sitting there now, I want you to imagine, even though you're in front of the mic, imagine you're just going to bench press, right?
Okay.
And imagine that you're warming up. And as you just begin to move your arms, begin to engage it. And as you begin to engage moving that weight up, I want you to see it in your mind's eye. And as you see it in your mind's eye, I want you to feel it. And I want you to feel that smooth movement of your wrist holding it, your elbows flexing, your chest engaged from the extension all the way out. Just lock it out and then let it come back slowly now. And then push it up and see that you can fire out of the hole again and then bring it back slowly and feel that motion. Feel it again. Feel it again. Feel how easy and lighter the weight gets each and every time. Every time you put more on, it gets lighter and you get stronger, right?
Yeah.
So what are you noticing while you're doing that right now?
I actually noticed my arms kind of tensing a little bit. I noticed kind of like different nerves, my like little kind of reacting in a way.
Right.
I'm being completely honest.
Yeah. And I didn't give you any more details other than just to do this, right?
No.
But all of a sudden your brain's firing and you're imagining that you're pushing some weight. So when you kind of go through that, you can get that pump.
I'd imagine if I'm not sitting in front of a mic and I'm laying down, it could probably be a little bit more effective too.
It doesn't have to be lying down. I mean, that's one way, but I mean, if I'm doing this with people coming back from an injury, is beginning to imagine, feel that muscle, feel it contract and be able to stretch, going further and, getting stronger, Tommy John injuries with, pitchers that I've worked with, bringing them back and being able to throw, quicker and easier is that the tendons are like, rubber bands. They're really flexible, and begin to change where instead of being tight, they're like got the perfect snap. They got the perfect release. You've got the perfect movement, in your body here. So you're beginning to, in your mind, visualize, but in this case, I like to actually do the movement, and you can get a pre-pump before you get out of your car.
This is so interesting to me because it kind of brings me to, and I don't mean to change topics because this is, I would love to have another episode where we go into, this type of stuff, maybe without discussing the R-rated side of it. But that being said, with COVID-19, with coronavirus, there's such a gap in play, right? That, I know Major League Soccer, the soccer league in the United States, they had like 3 games and they were on pause and now they're playing again. Major League Baseball, spring training, no games, now games. And NBA playoffs are, they're starting. NHL playoffs. There's specific athletes that are having success and teams you wouldn't expect to have success. You wonder if they used their time off in a different way, if they were doing exactly what you're saying, imagining or picturing or processing being back out on the field, focusing on a different narrative, the positives. And I'd be kind of curious if you polled some of those players if they were doing this.
I imagine that either they're doing it, in a formal way or an informal way because they're trying to keep their brain engaged. If you're not sharpening, you're kind of rusting, right? So, even still, you mentally, doing the bench press, you can get, muscular definition and growth, in your body. So the same thing is, if you go back and remember a soccer player named Pele, right?
Of course.
So he's one of the greatest that ever lived. When you study him, he would come into the locker room and he would actually lay down, is what I've read about him, and he would visualize his position. He would see him, as he was taking the ball down, being able to, get by any of his opponents by moving it and the footwork. And it was just like magic. It was like he controlled that ball, and then when you take a shot, it was like a laser, and he was able to, see the ball bend, see the ball go, wherever the keeper is not, and in his mind, when he could see anybody coming down, he was able to immediately put his eyes and his mind on what he needs to do to disrupt that movement of the ball against him, to either force him to kick it away or he takes it away. Right. So, but that's what he did. He mentally did that before every game. And you don't see as many people doing that process, but he played, at least 2 games in his head for the one that he was on the field. So, when you begin to do that, you're going to be, far ahead of your opponents, and that's one of the, the homework assignments that I have with pitchers, or golfers, or, we go back to the thing about putting, is go back to that hole and putt that hole. Putt, from 1 foot, from 2 foot, see it rolling in, see it breaking to the right, break it to the left, and it just drop and come back to your putt or go in, and begin to put that groove in. And how I just learned it for me when I putted is I started with 1 foot away. I began to sink 1 foot, then 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5. When you get 10 foot away, I was pretty confident that I could, one putt this. Mm-hmm. And you kind of develop the mental look, but also the feel that you need to have on, getting the ball to where it goes. But when you begin to do it in your mind, your brain doesn't know if it's real or not real, but acts as if it is.
Very interesting.
So when you do that in one way, it's for it, but this is how you create anxiety and worry and fear, right? Because your brain, you're doing it in your brain, your body doesn't know if it's real or not real, but acts as if it is. So, you think that spider from Harry Potter that's like, 3 cars, in size is right behind you, and someone says there's a little spider there, in your brain, it's just huge tarantula that's going to eat you, right? It's that way in your brain.
Yeah.
So, this is how people, create phobias and other issues that cause problems is, they could be from a physical trauma, or it could just be from a mental trauma that they've allowed to exist, and they keep putting energy into it.
It's very interesting. And one more question before we kind of wind things down is that phobia or mindset or the energy they put into something. What you do is scientifically based. However, individuals who have superstitions, do you kind of frown upon that? Or do you think in a way, maybe that helps them get in the right mindset, and similar to an athlete, right? And we used the example before who gets anxiety before a race and they see themselves through to have success, maybe putting, the same pair of socks on every game, as long as they're washed, is something they need to do in order to see themselves have success. Do you frown upon superstition?
Well, superstition is really, on one level, it's just a belief.
Okay.
It's a belief structure, right?
Sure.
And what is that belief based on, and how much do you believe it?
Yeah.
Right? Or how much do you doubt it?
Yeah.
If those, it's that old show, was it like Mike, he got Michael Jordan sneakers or something, and all of a sudden this little, 8-year-old kid's doing, dunks, from half court. Yeah. But it's the belief that, hey, Michael Jordan's special powers in these sneakers, and I'm free to be Mike or better than Mike.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's no more than a superstition than it is to, well, the Cubs couldn't win. Whatever, whatever thing that followed, along, it's a belief. And, either you think you can or you think you can't. Either way, you're right. I think Henry Ford put that quote out there, right? So why not think you can? Why not, begin to create what you want versus what you don't want?
And that's a great quote. And I think we'll end it there because that'll keep our listeners kind of pondering, especially during this pandemic and everything that's going on, what they can do in their lives to maybe better themselves or be more successful in day-to-day things that they want to focus on. So Todd, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed having you on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me in and being part of this. And if anybody needs to get in touch with us, it's phillyhypnosis.com. And you can reach us at 877-557-7409.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
Once again, that was Todd Stofka of Philly Hypnosis. If you enjoyed today's episode of the S.B.R. podcast, please follow me on Twitter at SBR_podcast. I'm also on Instagram at the same handle, SBR_podcast. And if you feel the need to provide any further feedback, please visit www.sportsbusinessreview.com, the official home of the S.B.R. podcast. Once again, my name is Brian McDonough, and have a great weekend, everyone.